Uh, awesome. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. All that is true. My name is Warner, and I do work in the video game industry. So yeah, it's only been like a year that I started working in this industry. So it's relatively recent for me, but I've been enjoying it. So happy to talk about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Warner. All right, Warner, and everyone, we'll go ahead and jump into the interview questions. Again, please feel free to unmute Mr. Ford and Mr. Smith if you have any questions from the students they would like to shout out to Warner. So the first question, Warner, is can you share how you decided to go on this journey that led you to where you are today?
Definitely. So I didn't really know that like having video games as like a career path was an option until I was like pretty late into my senior year of high school. So I started looking into things that I wanted to do like after high school. And I knew I wanted to do something that was like either marine bio or like something fun, but I didn't really know what that was going to be. So I started looking into it and I realized that I could just make video games because I like playing video games. So I was like, okay, I gotta follow this up and see what's up with this. So I found some universities that offered like degree paths in game development. So I decided to apply to a couple of those. And yeah, that was basically the beginning of the path. Like I didn't really know that it existed until like kind of late into the process. So I didn't really take any computer science before college. I didn't really take much art or any like I didn't make a video game before college. So the first time I ever interacted with any of that was when I started learning from it. But that was initially what got me into it was just the interest of making video games and doing something that seemed fun as a job because I wanted to enjoy working because I don't want to like not enjoy something that takes up like the vast majority of your life. So yeah, that was kind of the reasoning behind it too.
I like that. Yeah. So something you enjoy doing for the rest of your life, you might as well make some money out of it. So I really like that. So, awesome. So our next question, Warner, is what subjects or interests did you have as a younger self that helped guide you to your career today?
That's a good question. I think some of the things that really shaped, I guess, my specific path was I liked reading books a lot. And so I loved being able to just immerse myself in a different world and just like read through it and have fun with like a book. And when it comes to games, I want to make games that are pretty much that, where you're just like the main character of a book. You can like go around the world and do whatever you want. So that was a big one. Another one was like sports, if I'm being honest. Just being able to collaborate with people was something that like learning how to do that, learning how to like work with people that you might not like and people that you do like. So like learning those steps also helped a lot. And then just generally speaking, like game development is such a broad field that inspiration and insight can come from literally anything. So, I mean, we have people of all different backgrounds that work at Obsidian, like all the way from military vets to people that have been artists since they were like pooped out. So it's like we got the whole nine yards when it comes to like people types. So there's no one way to approach it, and there's no like correct way, but pretty much who you are influences how you make games. So that's kind of the bottom line.
Awesome. Thank you. And then our next question, Warner, is did you have a mentor or family members that was helpful to you on your journey? And what type of support did they provide to you? And if you could also share like important mentors in your life today, even currently, that may have impacted you along your journey.
Sure. So it's kind of a funny question. I didn't really have any mentors going into it. Like when I told my parents I wanted to study game development, my dad laughed. So it wasn't something that like anyone really thought of as like a serious pursuit until I started showing like metrics like, hey, look, the games industry makes more money than like music and TV combined in a year. So and then my parents were like, wait, that's actually kind of, you know, interesting. So then I had their support once I was able to like convince them that it was like a worthwhile pursuit. But in terms of mentors, after that, like they didn't have any experience with game dev. So they're basically just like, hey, we're like behind you, go and do this. But when I got to school, it was really nice because I was able to find a professor that was like super nice. And I told him, you know, like this is what I want to do. And after a while, like I discovered what I specifically wanted to do in games. because a lot of times game design degree paths are like super generalized. And when you get out of them, you have like the same portfolio or like set or like skill set that everyone else does. So you're not really hireable if you just do the bare minimum, which is scary because what else you're supposed to do except like the classes you're taking. So I realized that I had to like do more. So I talked to this professor about, I want to do level design, but we don't have any classes like that. Like, what am I supposed to do? So he ended up signing off on what was called an individual study. So instead of taking like another class, he just had me take a class one-on-one with him where I made levels. And that was super helpful because then he would like judge them, grade them. And I got an A. It was an easy A. All I had to do was like put in effort and talk to him. So that was nice. But he was massively influential in allowing me to, like, he fostered like a passion in me for that specific thing I wanted to do, which is level design. So that was really nice. But that took reaching out and being a little proactive and having the luck to know what I wanted to do, which isn't common. Like, that's tough. And even still, I would be happy doing other things, but I'm happy doing this for now. So from there, after I graduated, I was trying to find a job, and it's really hard in the games industry if you don't know people. Like, I didn't have connections that were like, this or that at whatever studio. So I was on LinkedIn, just like reaching out to a bunch of people, like shamelessly, like, hey, I want your job basically. So how do I do that? And like 90% of people just ignored me. So it took like, this one guy was super nice. He was like a lead level designer at the studio, and he was like, hey, let's like have a video call. So that turned into like several video calls. And when I had actually gotten an interview at Obsidian, I told him, and he was like, oh, I know some people there, so I'll put in a good word for you. And now I have a job at Obsidian. So it was kind of like all through the steps, it was like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I got to ask for help. And I just had to keep asking for help. I had to be kind of persistent about it. And there are people that were willing to help. So I guess that's a roundabout way of answering the question.
Yeah, no, I like that. That was actually going to be my next follow-up question. And I know right now, applying to jobs, it seems a little bit stressful even, especially with the way it's surrounded, basically the environment of how application, everything goes. So I think just to sharing some insight, as we are meeting with some high school students, some are getting ready to either apply to college or looking into some jobs after high school. What would be like your advice to them in regards to preparation of maybe applying to a college, like searching, and then also a secondary question is like going into the job industry, like what some prepping you can do beforehand?
Definitely. So the college pursuit is definitely daunting, especially if you don't know what you want to do. It's kind of rude, I think, to make like 17 and 18-year-olds decide what they want to do for the rest of their lives. But that's just the system we got to work with. So I'd say the thing to focus on for school and college is to like hone in on what it is you want to do and find a school that allows you to do that. And if you can't get into that school right out of high school, do community college for a little bit and then transfer into the school that you need. It's a completely valid path that a lot of my friends took. I know a lot of people that did it, especially at UC Santa Cruz. Like, most of the people that ended up graduating with me were transfer students. Because I mean, who wants to just go and do video games right out of school? Like, it's kind of weird. But it allows you to, I mean, you don't need to get like right into a 4-year university from high school. It's not like, that's not the rule. You definitely transfer in. So I'd say don't worry too much about like the initial success. It's gonna be a long pursuit no matter what. So I guess that leads into the next part of your question, which is like how to prepare yourself for the games industry. So one thing, like I said earlier, is even if you do a game design path, like, they're pretty generalized. So you need to be able to like have an idea of what you want to do after. Like, it could be engine programming. You could be a programmer that works on like something like Unreal Engine 5 at Epic Games. You could like work on program that stuff. You can be a graphics programmer, you can be a character artist, you can be a producer that doesn't really do any game dev, but it's like a project manager. There's a lot. You can do audio design, there's a whole bunch. So hone in on whatever it is you want to do, and in your free time, just do it. Like, there's awesome tools out there that allow you to just do what you want to do. So like, for example, I made mods for Skyrim. When I was growing up, like, that came out, I was like super stoked on Skyrim. I played the hell out of that game. It was great. So by the time I got to college, I was like, wait, they have like a whole mod kit for this. So I just made like a bunch of mods for Skyrim, and that helped a lot. Like when I applied, they were like, "Hey, those are cool." It's like, oh, I just did those for fun, but okay. And so stuff like that, massively important, because it seems simple to do like small things. And if you just do the smallest possible thing, it's still 10 times better than not doing anything. So if you have an interest in making games, just make them. Like that's the bottom line. Like they're relatively accessible. And if you don't have access to like a computer, you can just make card games and board games. And you can make RPG games like that. You can make a whole bunch of games. And even in college, all my classes, we always started with paper prototypes. So you would just make your game, but like board game style. Because all the systems will stay the same, the game design will stay the same, just how it looks way different. So there's no, it's like relatively easy to just hop in. It's yeah, it's easier than I assumed it would be. So just do it. Would be my take. Shout out Nike.
Awesome, thank you. It's funny how you mentioned scatter, because once in a while I would run against it, but most times no. So I'm very impressed that you know how to go about it. So, all right. So our next question is, and my general curiosity as well, what do you do in your job title as associate designer? And also, can you tell us a little bit about what your typical day in your job looks like?
Definitely. So before I say it, I can't really say anything about the game I'm working on. So I like signed an NDA, so I can't like tell any specific details, but I can talk about what I do generally speaking. And it's very similar to what I did when I was like modding, so I could like give more concrete examples. But basically, my job as an associate area designer is pretty much like a generalist for what I do. It's really nice. So I'm able to, I do level design, I place NPCs, I place enemy types, I set up interactions for like players to talk to NPCs, I set up stuff for them to like push buttons and have an explosion happen or something like that. So all of that stuff, all the stuff the player interacts with, that's my responsibility. So I work with artists and I work with writers, I work with the systems design team, and you know, I'll put a character in and I'll put in like a temp conversation, and then a writer that I'm talking to will just go in and make it good. Or I'll put in like a whole level design, like first pass, and then an environment artist will come in and change out all like the ugly boxes with like really cool ones. So that's kind of how that works. And I have to like facilitate a lot of conversations. A lot of the ideas fall on my team, like the area design team. So when it comes to like coming up with the idea for a level and how the player progresses through it, that's kind of my responsibility. And at Obsidian, they just threw me in the deep end. Like I didn't have small stuff at first. I was kind of terrified. So they just give me like really intense stuff. I don't really know why, but they do. And I have to like sink or swim. So it's a fun job. It's like super collaborative. I have to talk to humans like all the time. I have like several meetings a day. So my typical day, I walk up, turn on my computer, I open Unreal Engine, I start like on whatever task it is, whether I have to like put up a temporary conversation or do a new level design or stuff like that. And then usually I'll have like meetings or like group chats that I'm always constantly talking with to see like how our progression is going. You know, are we going to get this art asset today? Is this system working? Is this bug fixed? So all kinds of stuff like that.
Awesome, thank you. And then our next question, Warner, is how is your job tied to your community, if in any way it is? And then also, what connections does your tribe have to your tribal community, if any?
That's a good question. So I guess like the general answer I'll give is like, for the most part, game development isn't super like, it isn't like a very native space. So like for example, I'm the only native at my company. So it can be very isolating. So in order to make it a space that like isn't isolating, I'm like, I like reach out to a lot of people on the team, and I'm pushing for like native voice actors or native characters, like using or like implementing some of that stuff. So it's like, hey, look, like we need more native representation in our games. And just because we don't have natives at the studio, I'm the only one, that doesn't mean that like we can't have them. So that's one aspect of like how it presents itself at my studio is I'm constantly pushing. We have like our diversity and inclusion efforts that they put on for Microsoft. And so I'm pushing to like have more native influenced like talks and conversations, just so that people aren't like, wait, like what is that? So in terms of like that specific thing, that's how it usually resolves. But there are a lot of like native games out there. So there's a game called Never Alone, and that was made by like the team that made it wasn't like specifically indigenous, but they worked directly with one of the Alaska Indian tribes up there. And so they worked with that one of those tribes, and they were able to implement like it's completely narrated in an indigenous language, and that's really cool. And so you play through like a story narrated by an elder, which is just awesome. And so there are games like that, and they're becoming more commonplace. And so as it relates to my specific tribe, there are games that exist that we have made, and I haven't been able to like work directly with any of those efforts, but I'll keep bugging them, and I'll see if they will be cool with it to allow me to help with any of that stuff. So as it relates to just like my own specific influence on my studio with my culture, it's relatively little, but I'm trying to push so that isn't common. And so that's my goal.
Awesome. That is amazing. I love that. I love all the aspects brought to that question. Thank you. And then also, Warner, this will be our last question of the interview. And then Mr. Ford, Mr. Smith, I just want also want to know if are we good on time? Want to make sure we still have some room for questions from the students. I do.
Should be good.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, awesome. All right, Warner. So our last question for the interview is, there are a few Native people in the STEM professions, like you mentioned, and you're looking to break through that barrier. For our new and uprising students who are graduating or close to graduating, what advice can you share to the students so they may also go forward in the STEM field like you did?
It's a really good question. I'd say it unfortunately falls on an individual to find community. And so, like, for example, when I went to UC Santa Cruz, one of the first things I did was I went and I like found the American Indian Resource Center. I ended up volunteering there for a year. I worked with those folks, and it was really nice. I was able to find people that were indigenous that had a similar perspective. So I was able to find community in that way. And then that helped through college. And then after that, one thing that is kind of difficult but is absolutely necessary, at least from my perspective, is just to not leave who you are at the door when you work. Like, you are who you are, and that's something that you just can't separate from yourself. And so your perspective as an indigenous person is going to be unique in these spaces, but that doesn't mean it's not welcome. And if anyone makes you feel unwelcome about that's a problem. Like, they got a problem. So usually, like it's unfortunate, but it's just another reality where you have to. And this is just from my perspective. I'm saying you have to, but that's a general thing. It's something where if you leave it at the door and you never talk about it, things won't change. So when things come up and you're like, hey, maybe don't say that. That's kind of like, racist. People are like, oh wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. So sometimes it's as simple as that, and it's like creating more space by just talking about it will make it easier for the people after you. So that's kind of just the reality of STEM. You can find community, and I know like at Microsoft, they have indigenous people at Microsoft. And so they have like a whole group of people that are able to talk and communicate and have community based around that identity. And yeah, it's pan-indigenous. It's not like tribe specific, but that's just kind of the nature of like being indigenous in tech.
Awesome. Thank you, Warner. Awesome. So yeah, that is all the questions we have from the AISES side. I'll go ahead and open up the panel to our students, Mr. Ford and Mr. Smith's classroom, if there's any questions that students may have for Warner. I know also, Warner, I didn't mean to touch on this when I first introduced you. I don't think we ever got your major and your university that you attended when you graduated with.
Yeah, my apologies. I definitely should have mentioned that. So I went to UC Santa Cruz and I got 2 degrees, but one of them was computer science, computer game design, and the other was art design, games and playable media. So they were in 2 different departments, but they were both game design oriented. So I just double majored.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then just kind of like, I think Mr. Ford has a question.
I just unmuted because
Oh.
student asked, it was muted. So he asked if Warner could tell us the name of the game he was working on, or if that was restricted from the NDA.
Yeah, I'm working on the Outer Worlds too. I liked the first game a lot. I didn't work on that one at all. So after I beat it, I applied to Obsidian and they hired me. So that was kind of cool for me because I was a fan of the first game. And then now I get to work on the second. It was kind of surreal a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. So sometimes I'm just like, holy crap, I'm working on this. This is really cool. So yeah, I'm working on the sequel.
Awesome. All right. Anybody else have any questions for Warner?
Does he work on multiple games at a time or just one?
Does Warner work on multiple games at a time or just one?
Just one, unless I'm doing side projects. But Obsidian is working on multiple games. So, I mean, they have Grounded and Pentiment, Avowed, and the Outer Worlds too.
Do you currently have any side projects?
Not right now. I did for a little bit. I was working on a fun like Mario Party, you know, like Mario Party, Mario Kart thing where you had like the balloons behind you and you'd like throw shells at each other and see if you could like who the last one standing was. We're gonna do that, but like Battle Royale style. And then we both got jobs and it became incredibly difficult to do. So I think that isn't happening anymore. But yeah, I like games. So I'll say that the possibility of me having another project on the side is I mean, it's inevitable that that'll happen at some point.
Awesome, thank you. I think we have time for one more question from students or anybody.
What kind of Skyrim mods did you make?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I made like world specific, or I guess like canon friendly like mods. And so I made one that was for, I guess they were all for like the Thieves Guild. They were inspired by the Thieves Guild. So I put like a castle outside of this little place called Falkreath. It was like this like foresty bit. I just put a castle there. I put a whole bandit encounter there. And I put like a fun little sword. So you walk up, you can see this castle, you fight all these people, and that was fun. I also made a little cabin that was like outside of this city called Markarth. So you could walk up and there's like a dead guy in it, and he had like been stabbed while he was trying to like do his whole Thieves Guild stuff. And he had like a note, and there was like blood on the ground. That was fun to do. It was like kind of small. And then the other one I did was like a crypt, like outside of this town called Whiterun. So you went in, and you just fought all these like things called Draugr. They look like they're basically zombies. So you fought through all them, and then there was like a bandit little thing at the end, and they were like setting up a trap for one of the Thieves Guild members. So it was all stuff that fit into the world that already existed, because I wanted to show that they could just throw me at anything and I could like work with their stuff to make more of their stuff. So that was like my goal with that. But yeah, they were fun. Those are the ones I released. I also just like kind of messed around and made a whole bunch of stuff that I would never show anybody because that would be embarrassing.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Warner, today for taking some time in your morning. And I know it's early for you. Really appreciate you joining us this morning and talking with the students of Stillwell High School. So right now, students, I think we're going to go ahead and let Warner go. And if you have any questions, I think, Warner, is that okay if I email you if there's some question that pops up? Awesome. Yeah.
Definitely.
So Mr. Ford and Mr. Smith, if any students have any extra follow-up questions, I'm more than happy to forward them to Warner. And then again, response back, and once I get response from him as well. So thank you again, Warner. I think this will be the closing end of our interview. Thank you again, students, for taking us in on your morning. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let Mr. Ford or Mr. Smith know. And then we will have some future webinars with you all coming up soon. So I'll get those dates finalized with Mr. Ford and Mr. Smith. So once that's been finalized, we'll move forward to our next webinars. So thank you all again. And thank you again, Mr. Ford and Mr. Smith.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Warner.
Yeah, thanks, Wado. Have a good rest of your day, y'all.